The silence in the house felt different that night. It wasn't the comforting stillness of a home at rest, the kind that settles in when a child is finally asleep. The dishes are done, and the world slows to a gentle hum. No, this silence was suffocating, heavy, pregnant with truths that had been hiding in the corners for far too long. I sat at the kitchen table, the DNA report open before me, my fingers tracing the unforgiving words over and over again. 0% probability of paternity. The sentence mocked me. It reduced 4 years of love, of fatherhood, of believing in a future, into a cold, clinical fact. Noah was not my son. A part of me had expected it, but expecting pain doesn't lessen the blow when it finally lands. I felt hollow, as if my ribs had been cracked open, my heart left exposed to the frigid night air. I forced myself to take a breath, but it came out ragged. Like a man drowning just below the surface. Emily was late getting home. She had texted earlier, running behind, work stuff. But now I wondered if that was even true. How many other lies had I swallowed whole, believing them because I wanted to? How many times had I smiled at her, at Noah, at our little life, blissfully unaware that it was all a mirage? I heard the key turn in the lock. My body stiffened. The door creaked open, and then there was the rustle of her coat, the clink of keys hitting the entryway table. Footsteps. Then she stepped into the kitchen. The moment her eyes landed on the paper in front of me, she stopped cold. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale, almost ghostly. For a brief second I saw something flash across her expression. Panic, perhaps. Guilt. And then she schooled her features, her mouth opening, searching for words. But what could she possibly say? Whose child is he, Emily? My voice was calm. Too calm. But beneath it, a storm raged, waiting for the right moment to tear through everything in its path. Her lips parted, then closed again. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to erase what was in front of her. Finally, she let out a breath. Daniel. Please. That was it. Please. As if there was room for begging in the face of this betrayal. Please what? Pretend I never saw this. Pretend Noah is mine. I've done that for 4 years, Emily. I've done that every single day. Her eyes welled with tears, but I couldn't find it in me to care. I had no sympathy left to give. I had held my son, no, her son, through fevers, through tantrums, through nights of nightmares. I had whispered stories to him in the dark, told him he was my little boy. I had loved him with every fibre of my being. And now, what was I supposed to do with all of that love? Where did it go? She stepped forward, but I held up a hand. Don't! Her breath hitched. Her shoulders trembled. Daniel, it's not what you think. I let out a hollow laugh. Not what I think. Because what I think is that you let me believe I was Noah's father when you knew damn well I wasn't. She shook her head, but there was no denial in her eyes. Just shame. Just the confirmation I had been dreading. I swallowed hard, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Who is he? I asked again, my voice quieter this time. Emily hesitated, her fingers twisting together. And then she said a name that shattered the remnants of my world. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some faceless mistake from years ago. It was someone I knew, someone I trusted. And in that moment I realized this betrayal ran deeper than I ever could have imagined. The name hung in the air like a curse, twisting itself around my ribs, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Jason, my best friend, my brother in all but blood. The man who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had toasted to my happiness, who had held my son, his son, with the same hands that had betrayed me. The nausea hit me first. a wave of sickness rising from my gut, spreading through every nerve in my body. My hands clenched into fists on the table as the world tilted around me. I wanted to scream, to break something, to tear the entire house down with my bare hands. But all I could do was sit there, drowning in the realization that my life had been a carefully constructed lie, every piece placed just so to keep me from seeing the truth. Emily took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Daniel, Don't." My voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the space between us like a blade. "Don't you dare try to explain this to me. There is no explanation." Tears streamed down her face now, but I couldn't find it in me to care. Whatever pain she was feeling, it was nothing compared to the hurricane ripping through my chest. "How long?" I asked, the words tasting like bile. She hesitated. "Too long." "How long?" Her lip trembled. 5 years. 5 years. Longer than Noah had been alive. Longer than our son, his son, had even existed. I shot up from the chair so fast, it scraped against the floor with a sharp grating noise. Emily flinched, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I couldn't. Instead, I turned my gaze to the photos on the wall. Smiling faces. Happy moments. A life that had never truly belonged to me. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She sobbed. "Of course I did. I still do." I laughed. But there was no humor in it. Just something dark. Something broken. "You don't do this to someone you love, Emily." Her silence was the only answer I needed. I had to get out of there. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't stand to be in the same room with her. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my keys off the counter. "Where are you going?" she choked out. "Anywhere but here." I stormed past her, out the front door into the cool night air. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how much distance I put between myself and that house, one thing remained the same. The truth. Noah wasn't my son. Jason had taken everything from me. And I wasn't sure if I could ever come back from this. I drove without a destination, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The night outside was dark, the road stretching endlessly ahead, but I barely registered any of it. My mind was stuck on one thing. Jason. His name repeated in my head like a curse, like a sickness I couldn't shake. I pictured every moment we had shared over the years, every time I had called him my best friend, trusted him, confided in him. And all along, he had been betraying me in the worst way possible. A fresh wave of nausea surged up, and I had to pull over. My hands trembled as I stepped out of the car, sucking in the cold air, hoping it would calm the storm raging inside me. But it didn't. Nothing could. 5 years. 5 damn years. That meant their affair had started before Emily had gotten pregnant, before our wedding anniversary trips, before the nights we stayed up dreaming about our future, before I had even held Noah in my arms for the first time, believing he was mine. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. What a joke. I had spent the last 4 years changing diapers, rocking him to sleep, teaching him how to ride a bike. And all along, I had been raising Jason's child. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over Jason's contact. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to call him, to demand answers, to rip him apart. But deep down I already knew there was nothing he could say that would make this better. I needed more than words. I needed to see the look on his face when I confronted him. I needed to watch his world crumble the way he had shattered mine. Without another thought, I got back in the car and turned the wheel. I knew exactly where I was going. Jason lived on the other side of town. in a sleek condo that always seemed a little too nice for a guy who supposedly worked too much to have a social life. Now I knew why. He wasn't working late. He was with Emily. The drive felt like a blur, my pulse hammering in my ears. By the time I pulled into his driveway, my blood was boiling. His lights were on. He was home. Good. I barely registered slamming the car door shut before I was pounding on his front door. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Then the lock clicked. The door swung open. And there he was. Jason. My best friend. The man who had stolen everything from me. His face twisted in confusion for half a second before something else flickered in his eyes. Guilt. That was all I needed to see. I launched myself at him. The impact sent us both stumbling backward, Jason barely catching himself before we crashed to the floor. My fists connected with his chest, shoving him hard as rage surged through me like an unstoppable force. You lying, backstabbing piece of... My voice was raw, barely recognizable as my own. My hands ached to do more than just shove him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain that had been rotting inside me since I saw that DNA test. Jason's eyes widened in shock, his hands coming up as if to ward off the next blow. Daniel, what the hell? You know damn well what the hell... I roared, shoving him again. He staggered, hitting the wall. How long, Jason? How long have you been screwing my wife? His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. I could see it. The way his mind raced, searching for a way to spin this, to lessen the blow. But there was no way out. 5 years! I spat before he could even answer. 5 years. That's what she told me. That means Noah. My voice broke, something sharp and unbearable rising in my chest. Jason's face paled, but he didn't deny it. He just stood there, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Say something, I shouted. Tell me why. Tell me how you could look me in the eye every damn day, knowing what you did. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. I never wanted to hurt you, man. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. Never wanted to hurt me? You took everything from me. My family, my son, my whole damn life. Jason ran a hand through his hair, his expression crumbling. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Daniel. Then how the hell was it supposed to happen? He exhaled shakily, finally meeting my eyes. Emily and I, he hesitated, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook. You what? I growled. He sighed. We were together before you two got serious. The words slammed into me like a freight train. Before we got serious. I felt the ground shift beneath me, like reality itself was splitting apart. What? Jason's eyes were full of something dangerously close to regret. We had a thing, Daniel, before she chose you. I reeled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Chose me? As if I had been nothing more than a second option? A safety net? He nodded. She ended it. Said she wanted a future with you. I backed off. I swear I did. My stomach twisted. But you didn't really, did you? Jason flinched. Of course he didn't. You never stopped, did you? My voice was barely above a whisper now, the realization slamming into me over and over again. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between us spoke louder than any words ever could. I took a step back, my hands shaking. So what was I, Jason? Just some idiot you both decided to play house with? Some poor fool raising your son while you kept screwing my wife behind my back? Jason's face twisted in anguish. It wasn't like that. The hell it wasn't. My voice cracked. My chest heaved. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I had never felt this kind of rage before. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal, humiliation, grief, all tangled into something monstrous inside me. Jason took a cautious step forward. "Daniel, I know this is—" "Shut the hell up," I hissed, my entire body trembling. "I swear to God, if you say one more word, I will put you through that wall." He stopped. I turned on my heel, shoving past him, heading for the door. I had to get out of there before I did something I couldn't take back. But just as I reached for the doorknob, Jason spoke again. "Daniel, I think you should know something." His voice was low, almost hesitant. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. "What?" My voice was razor sharp. A heavy pause. Then, his next words made my blood turn to ice. "Noah doesn't know the truth." I turned slowly, my hands curling into fists at my sides. Jason swallowed hard. "He thinks you're his dad. He loves you, Daniel. And if you walk away now, he's going to lose the only father he's ever known." The air left my lungs. I stared at him, the weight of his words crashing over me like a tidal wave. Because deep down, I already knew what he was saying was true. Noah wasn't my son, but I had been his father every single day of his life. And now, I had to decide what the hell I was going to do about it. Jason's words sat heavy in my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. "He thinks you're his dad. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have even been a question. Noah wasn't my son. The DNA test had made that clear, but the problem was, I still felt like he was. I hated it. I hated that despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, the sheer violation of what Jason and Emily had done, there was a part of me that couldn't just shut off 4 years of being a father. I had kissed scraped knees, stayed up through fevers, taught him how to throw a baseball. I had held him on my shoulders at the zoo, made up bedtime stories, memorized the way he looked at me with complete trust. And now, all of that was supposed to mean nothing. I turned back to Jason, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "You don't get to use him to justify what you did." Jason exhaled sharply. "I'm not justifying anything, man. I know I messed up, but whatever happened between me and Emily, Noah has nothing to do with that." I shook my head, my pulse hammering in my ears. "He has everything to do with that. He's the proof of it. Every time I look at him, all I'm going to see is you." Jason's face twisted with something that looked like guilt. Or maybe it was something worse. Something closer to fear. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," he said, his voice careful. "But think about what you're walking away from. Noah loves you, Daniel. If you disappear from his life, it's going to destroy him." My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream at him, to tear his life apart the way he had done to mine. But I knew something Jason didn't. He had taken Emily from me. He had stolen the life I thought I had. But the one thing he couldn't take, the fact that I was the only father Noah had ever known. And maybe, just maybe, that gave me more power than Jason realized. I turned away without another word, wrenching open the door and stepping into the cold night air. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I drove home in silence, my mind a battlefield of rage, confusion, and something far worse, grief. Because that's what this was. The death of the life I thought I had. The death of the man I used to be. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, like I was stepping into a crime scene. I hesitated for a moment before finally pushing the door open. Emily was sitting on the couch, her face blotchy from crying. The second she saw me, she shot to her feet. "Daniel!" I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't." My voice was flat, emotionless. I didn't even feel like I was inside my own body anymore. She swallowed hard. "Did you go see him?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean your real husband?" "Yeah, I saw him." She flinched. "Daniel, it wasn't—" "Don't you dare tell me it wasn't like that," I snapped, stepping closer. "Don't you dare try to soften this. You lied to me for years. You let me raise another man's son. You let me love him like he was mine." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you." They were the same words Jason had said, and they meant nothing. I took a slow breath, trying to steady the storm inside me. "You don't get to cry, Emily. You don't get to play the victim here." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I should have grabbed my things and walked out right then and there. But there was still one thing left to do. A small voice echoed down the hallway. "Daddy?" I turned, and there he was. Noah. His little face was sleepy, confused. He rubbed his eyes with his fist, yawning. "Why are you yelling?" I felt something crack inside me. I should have been able to look at him and feel nothing. I should have been able to remind myself that he wasn't mine and walk away. But the problem was, I still saw my son. Emily sucked in a sharp breath behind me. "Noah, sweetie, go back to bed." He frowned, looking between us. "Are you mad at Mommy?" I clenched my jaw. "Noah, go to bed." "Are you leaving?" His voice was small, afraid. I stared at him, feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I turned back to Emily, my voice dangerously low. "We're going to figure this out. But not tonight." Then without another word, I walked upstairs, shut the bedroom door and locked it. I needed time to think. Because my marriage was over. But what about my son? Sleep never came. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My mind an endless loop of betrayal, anger, and painful memories that now felt tainted. Every moment I had spent with Noah, every first word, every step, every laugh, had been a lie. And yet, no matter how hard I tried to push it down, one truth refused to leave me. Noah was innocent. He didn't ask for this. He didn't know what his mother had done. To him, I was just Dad. But could I keep being that? The thought made my chest feel tight. If I walked away now, it would break him. But if I stayed, if I kept raising him, knowing he was Jason's son, could I look at him every day without seeing his real father's face staring back at me? I turned onto my side, pressing my fists into my eyes. There was no good answer. No choice that didn't feel like losing. When the first hints of morning crept through the blinds, I forced myself out of bed. My body felt heavy, like I was wading through quicksand. I had no idea what the next few days, hell, the next few hours, were going to look like. I only knew one thing. I needed to see Noah. When I stepped out into the hallway, I found him sitting on the floor outside the door. He had his arms wrapped around his stuffed dinosaur, his face still puffy from sleep. I swallowed hard. "Hey, bud." He blinked up at me, his lower lip trembling. "You slept in your room alone." His voice was small, uncertain. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. I crouched in front of him, my heart twisting. Yeah, I did. He sniffled, clutching the dinosaur tighter. Are you still mad at Mommy? I hesitated. How the hell was I supposed to answer that? Mommy and we have a lot to talk about, I said carefully. His little face scrunched up. But you're not leaving, right? The question felt like a knife in my chest. I should have told him the truth, that I wasn't really his dad, that everything he knew about his life was about to change. But looking at him, at the way his eyes were wide with fear, I couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, I reached out and ruffled his hair. I'm not going anywhere today, buddy. He relaxed slightly, but the worry was still there. And for the first time since I opened that DNA test, I felt something new. Guilt. Because no matter what I decided, Noah was going to lose something. Either I stayed, and he kept a father who could never look at him the same way again, or I left, and he lost the only dad he had ever known. Either way, my little boy was going to get hurt, and I hated Emily even more for putting me in this position. The rest of the morning was unbearable. Every moment felt stretched thin, tension thick in the air. I went through the motions, making breakfast, pouring coffee, but it was all mechanical. I barely tasted the food. My mind was too consumed with the impossible decision hanging over me. Emily hovered in the background, silent but watchful. She didn't try to talk to me, didn't push, but I could feel her presence like an itch I couldn't scratch. I wasn't ready to face her yet, not with Noah sitting across from me, chewing absently on his toast, swinging his little legs under the chair, completely unaware that his entire world was on the verge of collapse. I had to get out of there. I'm going out, I said suddenly, pushing away from the table. Emily flinched. Daniel, wait, I ignored her, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. But just as I stepped outside, Noah's small voice stopped me in my tracks. Daddy? I turned, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles ached. He looked at me with big, uncertain eyes. His stuffed dinosaur clutched tightly in his arms. Can we go to the park later? He asked. His voice was tentative, like he was afraid of my answer. My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend, just for a little while longer, that things were normal. But I didn't know if I could. Maybe, buddy, I managed. His face fell slightly, but he nodded. Okay. I forced myself to step outside, closing the door behind me before I could change my mind. I didn't know where I was driving. I just drove. Street after street blurred past, my mind running in circles. No matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't see a way forward. I could leave, cut my losses, walk away from Emily, from this house, from the life that had turned out to be a lie. But that meant walking away from Noah too, and I didn't know if I could live with that. Or I could stay, keep pretending, keep raising a son that wasn't mine, sharing a roof with a woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But that felt just as impossible. Somewhere along the way, I found myself pulling into a familiar parking lot. The gym. It wasn't planned, but maybe that was for the best. Maybe I just needed to hit something. I changed into my workout clothes, wrapped my hands, and went straight to the punching bag. No warm-up, no pacing myself. I just swung. The first hit sent a jolt up my arm. The second rattled my shoulder. But I kept going, throwing every ounce of anger, every ounce of pain into the bag. I loved him. He wasn't mine. I raised him. He was Jason's. Over and over. until my arms burned, my chest heaved, and my vision blurred with sweat and exhaustion. "Rough day." The voice pulled me out of my haze. I turned to see Mike, one of the trainers, watching me with raised eyebrows. I'd known him for a couple of years. Not a close friend, but someone I talked to in passing. I let out a breath, rolling my shoulders. Something like that. Mike leaned against the nearby bench, studying me. "You hitting the bag like it owes you money." I huffed a humorless laugh, shaking my head. Feels like the only thing I can control right now. He nodded like he understood. "You got kids?" The question hit harder than I expected. I hesitated, my gut twisting. I thought I did. Mike's expression shifted. "Damn." That was all he said. Just one word. But there was something in the way he said it that made my chest ache, like he got it. I wiped sweat from my face, letting out a bitter breath. "What would you do?" He was quiet for a long moment, then he exhaled, shaking his head. "Ain't no easy answer, man. You leave. The kid loses a dad. You stay. You gotta live with the lie." I clenched my jaw. "So what the hell am I supposed to do?" Mike studied me for a second, then shrugged. "Figure out what's worse. Losing him, or living with it." The words stuck with me. I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew one thing. I couldn't run from this forever. I stayed at the gym longer than I meant to, letting exhaustion wear me down until my body ached too much to think. But eventually, there was nothing left to punch, nothing left to lift, and I had no more excuses to stay. By the time I got back to the house, the afternoon sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. Inside, I could hear Noah's laughter through the living room window. The sound of it, so light, so pure, knocked the wind out of me. How was I supposed to walk away from that? When I finally stepped inside, the house smelled like spaghetti, my favorite. I knew what Emily was trying to do. She thought she could soften me up, reel me back in with routine, with familiarity. Not this time. She was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of sauce. She glanced up when I walked in, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I was about to explode or just keep ignoring her. "Hey," she said softly. I ignored her, stepping around her to wash my hands at the sink. I could feel her watching me, waiting. "I made dinner." She tried again. I dried my hands and turned to face her. "We need to talk." She swallowed, nodding. "Okay." I led her into the dining room, away from Noah. He was on the floor with his toys, humming to himself, blissfully unaware that his world was hanging by a thread. Emily sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "Are you leaving?" The question was so direct that it took me off guard. I let out a slow breath. "I don't know." She flinched but nodded. "You don't get to look hurt, Emily." My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You did this. You made these choices. And now I have to figure out how to live with them." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. "I know," she whispered. "Do you?" I leaned forward, my fingers digging into the table. "Because I don't think you do. I have spent the last 4 years believing that boy was mine. Do you understand what that means? Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every time he called me daddy. You let me believe it was real." She sucked in a breath, shaking her head. "It was real, Daniel." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "No." It wasn't. You let me live in a fantasy. She covered her mouth with her hand, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. But I wasn't done. I met Jason. Her head snapped up, eyes wan. I needed to know the truth. The whole truth. Not just the parts you were willing to tell me. She wiped at her eyes. What? What did he say? That you kept him away. That you never even gave him a chance to be Noah's father. I exhaled through my nose. And that's the worst part of all of this, Emily. Not only did you take away my right to know the truth, but you took away his. She let out a choked sob, shaking her head. I was scared, Daniel. I didn't know what to do. You and I were in such a good place, and I didn't want to lose you. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. So you lied. She nodded, wiping at her tears. I sat back, rubbing a hand down my face. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Her face crumpled. But more than that, I hesitated, the words thick in my throat. I don't know if I can be Noah's father anymore. A strangled sound escaped her, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Daniel, please. He loves you. You're all he's ever known. You don't have to leave him. I clenched my jaw, looking away. I wanted to stay. God, I wanted to. But every time I looked at him, all I could see was Jason. And I didn't know how to unsee it. Emily reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I need time, I said. I'm not making any decisions right now, but I can't pretend this didn't happen. She nodded shakily, tears slipping down her face. I understand, but I wasn't sure she did. Because no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. By the time everything had unraveled, I was no longer the man I used to be. In the beginning, I was fueled by rage, by the need to make Emily and Jason pay for the betrayal. But now, after everything I had learned and experienced, I understood that I wasn't after vengeance anymore. I wasn't even after justice. What I was after was truth, and the peace that came with it. I had sacrificed years, heartache, and the love of my child for a fantasy. But now, the illusion was gone. It wasn't the revenge I had imagined in the early days after discovering the truth. It wasn't a fiery explosion of anger or a reckless pursuit of retribution. It was methodical, calculated. I had to outsmart them, not just crush them. The reckoning had to be sharp, precise, and unforgettable. When Emily and Jason were exposed, it wasn't just their betrayal that broke them. It was the way it came to light. Emily was the one who was most vulnerable in the end. The silence between us had lasted for weeks after I confronted her. Her guilt consumed her, and she couldn't bear to face me without crumbling. But it wasn't just her personal failure that did her in. It was the scandal. The moment she reached out to Jason, trying to salvage what little was left of her life and their affair, she made a crucial mistake. Jason had let his guard down, acting as if the damage was already done, as if there was nothing left to lose. But Emily had underestimated the web I'd spun around them. By the time she called him, desperate for comfort, everything she had ever done was already in the hands of someone who was waiting for that one slip-up. I had someone watching them. A private investigator, sure, but more importantly, I had the truth. And when she went to him, trying to plead for forgiveness, her confession to him became the final nail in her coffin. It was on tape. The fallout was quick. Emily's carefully crafted life came crashing down. The humiliation was unbearable. But it wasn't just her. Jason's world shattered in front of his eyes. He was a man of power. Someone who had built his entire identity on respect, trust, and control. But when the recordings of Emily's desperate, tearful plea were released to the press, along with the DNA report proving the truth of Noah's paternity, his empire collapsed. They both tried to spin it, to defend themselves, but the public wasn't buying it. Emily's past came into the light, her secrets, her lies, her desperate attempts to keep up appearances while she had her affair with Jason. She had played me, and in the end, she played herself too. And Jason lost everything. The people he had once relied on to elevate him, his loyal business partners and friends, abandoned him. His company tanked as his reputation plummeted into the ground. No one respected him anymore. He had failed to realize that the life he thought he was controlling was built on a fragile web of deceit, and the moment it broke, he was left with nothing. And me? I watched it all. The satisfaction was there, but it was hollow. I had won. Yes. But I had to sacrifice so much to get to this point. I was still a father. I was still Noah's father. But the connection had changed. I couldn't erase the truth, and as much as I wanted to hold on to the role I had once cherished, I couldn't pretend things were the same. There was no going back. It was strange, living in the aftermath. The world didn't stop just because I had gotten justice. Life continued. People moved on, and so did I. I didn't stay in the house. I couldn't. It had become a tomb for everything I had lost. I packed my things, and for the first time in years, I made a decision for myself. I found a new apartment in the city, far away from the life I had known. I found a new job, one that didn't remind me of the years I had spent buried in a lie. Noah. Noah was the hardest part. I was still his father. I still loved him with all my heart. But our relationship had changed. The weight of the truth hung between us, and I didn't know how to navigate it. I visited him every weekend, but each visit felt like a reminder of what I had lost, of the role I would never have again. As for Emily, she tried to reach out. She begged for forgiveness, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't comprehend. Her attempts to mend what we had were pointless. She was too late. Jason, too, reached out once. He tried to rebuild his empire, to find his footing. But I was no longer the man who needed to prove anything to him. I watched as his attempts failed. People whispered about him behind his back, and slowly he faded into obscurity. No one remembered the man who once had it all. A year later, I received a call from Emily. It was a brief, simple conversation. She told me Noah had asked about me again, that he missed me. I could feel her desperation, even over the phone. She tried to sound strong, but I could hear the cracks in her voice. I hung up without saying a word. I knew what she was trying to do. She wanted me back in their lives, to somehow fix everything, but I had already moved on. I wasn't the man who needed her or Jason anymore. I was someone new. As I closed my phone, a text popped up. It was from an unknown number. "Are you happy now?" I didn't respond. There was no need, because the answer was clear. I was free.